Hi, everyone. This is your People Behind the Science podcast host, Dr. Marie McNeely, and I'm excited to have you here with us for episode 871 of People Behind the Science with our guest, Dr. Steve Platt. Listeners, if you want to learn more about our show, check out some of our past episodes and find our recommended book list, you can visit us at peoplebehindthescience.com. And Steve shared some excellent stories in our conversation today, so listeners, get ready to meet another one of our brilliant people behind the science.
Every day, discoveries are made that will change our understanding of the world around us. Dr. Marie McNeely is here to bring you the brilliant minds who are making these discoveries so they can share their incredible stories and take you on an amazing journey. Welcome to People Behind the Science.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to People Behind the Science. Today, I am thrilled to be speaking with our guest scientist, Dr. Steve Platt. So, Steve, welcome to the show today. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing fine. It's a privilege to be on your show.
Well, we are delighted to have you with us, and I'm excited to learn more about you and the wonderful work that you're doing. But first, let me take a moment to tell our listeners about your current position and the path that you took to get to where you are today. So listeners, Steve is a Wildlife Conservation Society, or WCS, herpetologist for Southeast Asia. He received his bachelor's degree in Forestry and Wildlife Management from Louisiana State University, his master's in biology from Southeastern Louisiana University, and his PhD in zoology from Clemson University. Afterwards, Steve worked for WCS from 1996 to 2001, and in 2001 he transitioned into a career in academia. He served on the faculty at Oglala Lakota College in South Dakota for about 5 years, followed by 5 years as a faculty member at Sul Ross State University in Texas. And then in 2011, Steve accepted his current position and returned to WCS. And Steve, we've shared a little bit about your story, but I'm looking forward to getting to know you more as a person as well as a scientist in our conversation today. So can you share with our listeners, what do you like to do when you're not hard at work doing science and conservation?
Well, it really depends on where I am. If I'm here in Southeast Asia, I read a lot. I also do a lot of walking. I'm kind of a fanatic about walking, and I go bird watching whenever I get the opportunity. When I go back to the States, I like to do a lot of hunting. And when I lived there, I really enjoyed raising poultry, chickens in particular, just as a hobby. So, yeah, that's kind of what I do outside of my work.
Oh, cool. Wonderful to get a window into your life outside of science. You mentioned bird watching. Are there particular birds that you're always on the look for, or particular times of the year that you like to go bird watching?
Pretty much depends on where I'm at. If I'm in the U.S., I try to target migration. Originally from Louisiana, and I still have family there. So hit it during the spring if I'm around. Here, like a lot of bird watchers, I keep a life list. So you know where to go to look for certain species that you don't have. So in the States, when I'm walking around in green spaces, I'm never without a pair of binoculars, just because you never know what's going to pop up.
I love that. Well, is there a particular elusive bird on your life list that you're hoping to see soon?
Well, I've always wanted to see an ivory-billed woodpecker. That's probably a pretty remote possibility, but I like to keep my options open.
Well, Steve, it sounds like you've got a lot of wonderful hobbies outside of work, but I'd love to talk about your science as well. You were doing some really cool and really impactful work. So how do you describe what you do to somebody who's not in science or isn't familiar with this area of conservation?
People generally ask me what I do, and I tell them I'm a crocodile and turtle biologist. I do a lot of field studies of crocodiles and turtles, and also a lot of work with captive populations. Just kind of keep it simple. When you get in those conversations, they always bring up Crocodile Dundee, or they talk about their pet turtle. So the conversation, you try to steer it away from the sensational part of it and just stick to what fascinating creatures crocodiles and turtles really are.
I love that. I did have a pet turtle at one point as well. So
yeah, you and everybody else, including myself. Everybody likes turtles. Everybody except maybe sociopaths, especially baby turtles. So it's an easy conversation to have.
I love that. Well, Steve, I'm excited to get into some of the details of your work as we go through our conversation. But I think having a motivational quote or a saying or just something that keeps you getting up and going into work every day can be really helpful, because there are so many challenges that you face in science and particularly in conservation. So do you have a favorite quote or a saying or something that particularly motivates you?
I've actually got a couple of them. One of them, I really like the classic Western, The Outlaw Josie Wales with Clint Eastwood. I guess it probably came out when I was in high school in the 70s. But he's talking to the Cherokee chief, Lone Waddy. Lone Waddy was telling him when he went to Washington, and Lincoln told him and some other chiefs, you boys need to endeavor to persevere. And he said, well, I've been trying to endeavor to persevere ever since then. And so that's kind of always often sign off emails with endeavoring to persevere. That's kind of our motto around here. And also, and I'm sure the people at my office are sick of hearing me say this, but also often quote Napoleon when he said, ask anything of me but time. And I think Al Pacino had a similar line in Heat. He put it a little more bluntly. I probably can't use the same language on public presentation, but I don't like to waste time on nonsense, especially administrative matters. I have not a lot of patience in dealing with administration.
Oh, absolutely. I think these quotes are fantastic. I think just this idea of perseverance or persistence in science is so important. And this idea of time being this very precious resource that you don't want to waste on things that are not the top priorities in life, I think is something that unfortunately you have to sort of deal with the red tape and the administrivia in science. But I think keeping that big picture and really focusing on it in mind is important. So I appreciate you sharing these quotes, and I'd love to talk a little bit more about some of the people who might have motivated and inspired you over the course of your career, Steve. So when you look back over some of your experiences, are there particular role models or mentors or just inspirational figures that had a big impact on you?
When I was a kid, I read every book that George Schaller ever published. I remember even like when I was in the 8th grade, I was stuck in a music appreciation class. I got booted out of the class for reading, I think it was Year of the Gorilla. The lady got really upset and called my parents and stuff. And later on as an educator, I was really dismayed how she handled that. I shouldn't have been reading in class, but you don't want to try to discourage kids from reading. But yeah, I read everything, and I was familiar with the Bronx Zoo, and George was associated with WCS, or New York Zoological Society at the time. And never in my wildest dreams that I would ever imagine I'd be actually more or less following his footsteps at the same institution. Although George, of course, worked on large mammals and I work on crocodiles and turtles, but still it's kind of the basic approach. But there was also another guy there, a close friend of mine that was also a mentor, John Thor Bjarnson. And WCS started funding my research when I was a graduate student. And John came in. He was also a crocodile biologist. I guess he was 3 or 4 years older than I was, and he started working at WCS and took me under his wing and made sure that I was funded every year. And then when I finished up, he hired me to go back as an employee, and he was always interested in what I was doing. We co-authored a number of papers together. And John also played a very instrumental role in my wife's career as well, and numerous other people as well. And unfortunately, John contracted malaria in 2010 and died from it. Actually, my wife and I found out about his death on Valentine's Day. So for us, that's just not a holiday we celebrate anymore.
Sure.
But John played a very big role in getting me to where I am now. A lot of the projects I work on, John originally started. And I always feel like following his footsteps, and I've got to live up to the standards that he set. So those two people were probably the most influential role models that I've had.
Definitely. I appreciate you sharing these stories. I think it is just sort of this feeling of responsibility almost of carrying the torch forward on the back of the work of these legends in the field. And it sounds like already in your school years, you were starting to read books and get interested in conservation and biology and animals in general. So can you maybe take us back to the beginning and share a little bit more about how this interest began, or maybe when you first realized that you were starting to get interested in these areas?
I don't know when I first got interested in it. In fact, I always tell people it's probably in my genes. And I say that, I'll tell you a little short story here. But I was adopted, and when I was a couple of weeks old, and my adoptive parents weren't outdoorsy people. They always supported me in what I wanted to do, but they weren't animal people. My mom was actually an art teacher, and my dad was in real estate. And so I was 40 years old when I finally met my biological mom. And lo and behold, it turned out she was a wildlife biologist.
Oh, wow.
I just remember going to her house for the first time. I always look on people's bookshelves, and her bookshelf looked like my own bookshelf. We read the same type of books and the same titles, had very similar interests. And I really think that there's something genetic. I used to always use this when I was teaching as an example. You talk about nature versus nurture, but I think there's something in my genes. It's more than just a coincidence. Admittedly, a sample size of one. But ever since I was a little kid, I was interested. I'd go out to fortunately where we lived, there was a lot of open space and creeks and ponds and stuff and catch turtles and snakes. In high school, I thought I would go into veterinary medicine. I was working for a veterinarian. I realized my first year at LSU, this isn't really what I wanted to do. And I switched over to Forestry and Wildlife Management. And I knew then I had found a home. And so I did my bachelor's degree. And then I went and did a master's degree on working on alligators, which is a dream come true. Then after that, I went to Australia and I had an unpaid internship with Graham Webb, who at the time was one of the leading researchers on crocodiles. And there was this original cohort that came in the 60s and the 70s, which was when science really started looking at crocodilians. And it was one of the greatest learning experiences of my life. It was very informal. I was basically just his unpaid help. So I ended up entering a lot of data in the lab, in the office, cleaning up, taking care of captive crocodiles. But we also spent a lot of time in the field. And I came away from that knowing this is exactly what I want to do. Then I went to Clemson. And when I was in Clemson is when I was introduced to Wildlife Conservation Society. They actually funded my dissertation work. So in 1992 was when I received my first funding from Wildlife Conservation Society, and they funded me every year. I finished up in 1996, and then John Thorbjarnson hired me to go back to Belize. I did my dissertation work in Belize on one species of crocodile. He hired me to go back in 1996 and work on a second species of crocodile. So I was down there for 2 years, and then he hired me to go to Southeast Asia. The first trip I made, I went to Myanmar, which at that time was pretty much off limits to foreigners. And we did a crocodile survey in the Irrawaddy Delta. And that's where I met my wife. And my wife was in graduate school and she's Burmese. And she was in graduate school at the time and came on the crocodile survey with us. And it's one of those moments that you don't realize the significance of it at the time. But I remember the day we met. We were in the field for about a week. She didn't want to even talk to me because she spoke really good English, but she had never spoken to a native English speaker before. But anyway, after I worked in Southeast Asia until 2001, and then I decided to go into academics. So then my wife and I, who we continued to see each other even after I went back to the U.S., and then she was working on her PhD in Thailand at Chulalongkorn University. And we decided we were going to get married. So we got married in 2004 and spent the next 6 years trying to figure out how to get back into the game. And so like you already introduced me, I was on the faculty at Oglala Lakota College. And then I went to Sul Ross, which is a fantastic university. We called it Harvard in the desert. It's a small school. I don't think there was ever more than 2,000 students when I was there, but in an extremely remote location, one of the most sparsely populated regions in the U.S. You're out in the Chihuahuan Desert, surrounded by mountains. Big Bend National Park is, on your doorstep. And I loved it out there, but there wasn't any work positions for my wife available. I really thought we could do the most good going back to Asia. So it's kind of a funny story because I was awarded tenure. At the same time, we were negotiating positions. She works for Turtle Survival Alliance. They're our partner organization. So they hired her in January, and I got tenure in March. And 3 days later, I walked into the dean's office and told him I was resigning. I was going to, he thought I just wanted more money. I told him, no, I'm going to Southeast Asia to do turtle conservation. I'll never forget the look on his face. And he just started shaking his head saying, this is madness. This is madness. And I realized we were taking a big gamble after you get tenure and to turn around and walk out and go move to Myanmar of all places and do turtle conservation. But we've been doing it. She went in January and I went in May, and we've been here ever since then. And I have no regrets about coming here. It's probably the best decision I made in my life.
Oh, definitely. Well, Steve, I think you have a fascinating career path, and I'm curious about that original transition to academia. So you'd been working for WCS at that point for quite some time, a 5-year stint there after your PhD. What then motivated you to transition to a career in academia?
My career path definitely wasn't linear. And it was just one of those things. I just kind of always wanted to go into academics. And when I was a graduate student, everybody talked about getting positions in academics, and pretty much all of my fellow grad students ended up in academics. And so I thought I'd settle down for a while. But once I actually settled down, and again, I really, especially when I was at Sul Ross, I loved the place. It was a great place to work and to live. But it was just, I missed the action, basically, of the field work. And to be honest, I guess I was a pretty good professor. I always got good reviews, but I felt like, I don't want to say anybody could do the job, but any qualified person could probably fill those shoes, but not many people could do what my wife and I were doing in Myanmar. So I don't want to say we were indispensable, but I felt it was more rewarding working in conservation in the developing world than it was teaching in the U.S.
Certainly. And I'm also curious about what was it about reptiles that really initially sparked your interest and has kept you captivated all these years later, these turtles, snakes, alligators, and crocodiles that you've studied over the years?
I don't know. I'm interested in other types of wildlife, and I've published papers on mammals and birds as well. But I started with crocodiles. And when I was growing up, alligators were on the endangered species list. And I think I was probably 10 years old when I first saw my first alligator down on the Mississippi Gulf Coast. Ever since then, I've just found them fascinating animals. It's very hard to define or articulate what attracted me to them. And turtles were always a part of my life. And you don't really think about it, but turtles as a group are one of the most critically endangered groups. And I think 49% of all species of turtles and tortoises are endangered. A lot of that, I think, factors into my decision to work with them.
Definitely. So let's talk a little bit more about the work that you're doing right now. Steve, can you give us a high-level description of a project that you're working on right now that you are just the most excited about?
Well, there's actually a couple of them, but the one we'll be working on in just a few weeks is our Siamese crocodile reintroduction program in Laos. And Siamese crocodile is one of the most critically endangered species of crocodilians in the world. Unfortunately, there are others, but they're pretty much have been extirpated from most of their range. And what we do in Laos, there's this population in a wetland. The only reason they're there is because the local communities have these spiritual beliefs. They believe that the crocodiles are the embodiment of their dead ancestors, so they don't bother them, which is pretty unusual when you think about it, because, I mean, crocodilians are large predators. These are not man-eating crocodiles. I mean, any crocodile that's large enough can take a person, but they're shy and retiring for the most part, so that's not a concern. But because of that, this population has persisted there. So we started working with them back in 2011 to 2014, I believe, and the donor discontinued our funding. And so there was about 5 years there we weren't able to do anything. And then we had a really forward-thinking country director in our Lao program that started the program up, not just crocodiles. It's what we call a landscape program where we look at the entire landscape, and crocodiles are a big part of it. So every year I go to Laos, it's outside of Savannakhet, and we go out and we collect crocodile eggs and we incubate them. Then we head start the hatchlings. In other words, hatchling crocodiles come out of the eggs. They're tiny. Everything eats them. They naturally have very low survivorship. And so what we do is we head start them. We rear them up to a little under a meter in length. When they get that age, they get that size, they're pretty much, I don't want to say they're immune to predators, but there are not many predators that'll take them. And then we release them back into the wild. So we've been doing that. And we recently, in the past 2 years, we've had 2 different females that we released early on in 2014, and we found them nesting. So it's kind of proof of concept. We know that what we're doing works. So I really enjoy that. I like going out. I like looking for crocodiles. I like being out in the wetlands. And I think there's another project in Cambodia that another NGO is working on that's been pretty successful. But other than that, this species has pretty much been extirpated throughout its historic distribution. So we have a crocodile population there in Savannakhet that's actually expanding. And of course, we work with local communities, which is very rewarding to see that relationship and that conservation model succeed.
Definitely. And just maybe, I guess, to give us a sense of volume, how many crocodiles or how many eggs are you supporting each year through this process of sort of jump-starting their growth and getting them back in the wild?
I think it was 2 years ago, we did 100. We ended up with over 100 hatchlings.
Oh, wow.
And we just don't have the space for that. And so this past year, we only collected half of each clutch being the eggs in the nest. That was interesting in itself, too, because we took half of the clutch in, we left half there, and then we were able to monitor and see how many of these nests survived. So I think we had 9 nests last year, and only one of those successfully produced offspring. Predators got the eggs, some of the nests flooded, but that's what you expect. It tends to vary. In other species of crocodiles I studied, you get a wet year, most of them are lost to flooding, you get a dry year. The nests don't go underwater, but predators get them. And that's what we saw here, the same type of relationship. We ended up with around 50 to 60 crocodiles that we hatched out successfully that were now head starting. And it takes about 3 years. So we'd say 32 months to get them up to size. And just today, my colleague in Laos sent me some photographs where they had removed a group of 33 crocodiles that were from 2023. We moved them into what we call an acclimation pen. These are pens out in the wetland. We leave them there for a few weeks so they can kind of get imprinted on the area. And then we just make holes in the fence and let them escape before it starts raining in June. So I guess this year we'll probably shoot for 50 to 60 hatchlings. So probably around, 75 eggs maybe. If we're lucky, we'll bring those back and incubate them.
Well, Steve, I think this is absolutely remarkable and really cool to hear about some of the work that you're doing there in Laos. And it sounds like there are some challenges in the work that you're doing. I think in general, doing field work is a challenge, and oftentimes things are unpredictable. So let's talk about some of the difficult days that you've faced. I think so many scientists face these moments where it just seems like everything's going wrong and there's just a major failure on the horizon. So can you talk about one of your major struggles that you've faced in your career, or a big failure that you've had, and how you've persevered through that difficult time?
Well, probably the worst period of my career was in November, December 2016. I guess it's more in December. And what happened, I was working in Myanmar, and we had an excellent team there. And my wife was there working for WCS and TSA. And there was this confiscation of big-headed turtles, platysternon, megacephalon. They're in very high demand by Chinese turtle farms. And most of the trade, probably 99% of it, is all illegal. And there had been a confiscation of these turtles. They're very difficult to keep in captivity. You can do it. I mean, we do it successfully, but they're very delicate, and you can't put them together because they're aggressive towards each other, except when they're mating. There's been a massive confiscation of over 1,000 of these turtles.
Oh, my goodness.
And we were called in to assist the government on this. And the turtles had just been kept in deplorable conditions. So we had to go get them. I was in the field when this happened. They had no way to contact me. But my wife and the rest of the turtle team, our veterinarian, they had to go to the border along the Myanmar-Thai border and get these animals. And that was an insurgent area. And just getting to the border area was very difficult, and getting them back. And the turtles just were in terrible physical shape. And we were overwhelmed with just the numbers of turtles. So we had veterinarians came in from the Bronx Zoo. We had veterinarians from Singapore Zoo, and we had some from Europe. So we had top-notch healthcare professionals available. And we still were just losing turtles, just day after day. They were dying. And I got called in. They finally reached me, and they sent somebody to come get me. So it took me another 2 days to get there. And by the time I arrived, the worst had passed, but the crew was just completely demoralized. I was there some of the mornings. We'd make the rounds and just haul out 10, 15, 25 dead turtles for the pathologist to look over. It was very depressing. It really hurt me to see what this was doing to my staff. Personally, too. I mean, I was sitting there looking at my wife was just heartbroken. The veterinarians were doing their best, and we ended up saving very few of those turtles. It was something like almost 1,000 out of like 1,200 of them died. It was just a real blow to us, and it wasn't through any fault of our own. I'm not trying to blame anybody. We had, like I say, top-notch veterinary care, but the turtles were in such bad shape, and we were just overwhelmed with numbers. I mean, you try to do triage when you get there, but still, it was just a devastating loss. And part of the problem, too, was that the turtles had been held as evidence for a few days, and then it took us forever to get them out of there. So we sat down with the forest department, and they wanted to affix blame to somebody. We're like, we're not trying to blame anybody. In the future, this is what we need to do. And we developed some fairly rigorous protocols for when there's a confiscation. And within a few months, there was another fairly large confiscation. Everybody followed the protocol, and we came away with, I don't remember what the loss rate on that, but it was less. It was about 10%, I believe. So there's always some deaths that are going to be avoidable. But I think we learned from the first experience, even though it was so emotionally devastating. And also, you really get pissed off, too. people don't realize when they go buy exotic pets, the mortality in the supply chain. So, I mean, you're angry at pet dealers, you're angry at farmers, you're angry at the poachers that are getting them and the smugglers, the traffickers for doing this. And so it was just a really devastating experience. But I think we at least learned from our mistakes. And the next time when it happened, we were able to save many more turtles. I don't want to say the turtles didn't die in vain. I mean, at least we learned something, but I hope I never have to go through something like that again.
Absolutely. And I think in these difficult situations, right, you need to give yourself some time to grieve. But I do really love that you took this productive approach of like, all right, we need to sit down with the forestry folks. We need to make a plan because this is going to happen again. I think there's that recognition of the inevitable and making sure that you're being proactive so that you don't have to go through quite as devastating of a situation the next time this happens.
Yeah, that wasn't our first big confiscation, but usually when you get turtles, they were in much better physical shape. And so we knew what we were doing, but man, they were so bad off. I mean, you can't take a turtle and devote 2 or 3 hours of individual care when you've got 1,000 turtles that are dying all around you. So I hope I never experience that again.
Definitely. And I think this is an important window into just some of the challenges in your specific field of conservation. Like you said, there's always going to be losses. You're not going to be able to save every individual. And that's something you have to be emotionally prepared for, which I think is important because not everybody can handle that. So I appreciate you sharing this story. And I don't want to just focus on the struggles and the tough times, Steve. I'd love to talk about some of the successes as well. I think it's easy to focus on the ones you lose, and often you forget to celebrate the ones that you save. So let's take a moment to talk about some of your successes. Do you have a favorite victory that you've had in your career, whether it was a big win or just a small but particularly meaningful one for you?
Fortunately, I can point to a number of successes, and there's something I'm very proud of. And I should also say, you're interviewing me, but I'm speaking on the behalf of a number of different people because I don't work alone anywhere. I work with a lot of really talented people, both in Myanmar, Cambodia, Laos. So often I'm the face of the project because I'll give these presentations, but a lot of this is just due to the hard work of my colleagues. But in Myanmar, and again, I don't want to sound like I'm blowing my own horn here, but we've done a lot of really good work. I mean, for instance, the star tortoise, which by 2001, it was probably extinct in the wild for a number of reasons. But the demand from the high-end pet trade was what really drove that species into the ground. I mean, it was ecologically extinct. In other words, there were a few tortoises left in the wild, but there were no viable populations anywhere. So working together with the Myanmar Forest Department, we assemble these captive breeding groups and begin breeding them in captivity. They're not that difficult to breed in captivity. In fact, I kind of say that they're the white rats of the tortoise world because once you provide the right conditions for them, they lay multiple clutches during the year. Some of the females lay 5 or 6 clutches a year. So you can produce a lot of offspring in a short period of time. And so we started out with a founder group of about 175 animals. And I have a graph that I give in presentations. I like to point it out. My wife denies this, but things kind of struggled along in the early 2000s, bump here and there, a few 20 offspring, 25 offspring here, 1 year, not much. And it suddenly hit. She arrived in 2011, like I say, before I did. And the graph after that is exponential or near exponential growth. And her boss calls her a force of nature. And she just kind of took over and started working with the forest department, coordinating efforts, getting these animals. And right now, I don't know how many we have right now, 12 to 14,000 of them in captivity. If anything, we should scale back on captive breeding because now, because of the civil war in Myanmar, we can't get them out into the wild as fast as we'd like. But once you got the tortoises breeding, then we started reintroducing them into the wild. And we did it in one wildlife sanctuary, a relatively small sanctuary, and it was successful. And then we took that model and replicated it at a much larger sanctuary, I think 40,000 hectares, one of the largest tracts of deciduous forest left in central Myanmar. And then we were looking at a third sanctuary. And then, of course, the civil war broke out in Myanmar, and we had to withdraw from that sanctuary because it's become a war zone. So it's become very difficult to work in Myanmar now. But there was another species of turtle as well, the Burmese roof turtle, which is a very large aquatic river turtle, which was down to just a handful, less than 25 turtles that we knew about, both in the wild and captivity. And I rediscovered that species in 2001 on a river not far from Mandalay in central Myanmar. And shortly after that, another biologist, Gerald Kuchling, rediscovered another population on the Chinwin River and also found animals in temple ponds. In Buddhist temples, they generally have ponds and people release animals into the pond. It's kind of a way to earn karmic merit. And they got those animals out and started a captive breeding program, which has been very successful. We don't produce anywhere near the number of offspring that we do of star tortoises. But for the past few years, we've gotten almost 400 hatchlings, and we're breeding turtles now that we bred in captivity, and those are beginning to lay eggs now. So we've gone the full cycle, and we've gotten them back into the wild. Reintroducing river turtles is much more challenging than to do tortoises, because obviously tortoises are on land and they can't walk very far. Most of them only move 1 kilometer, 2 kilometers. So you can kind of corral them in the protected areas, but release a river turtle in the upper Chinwin River, and it could go all 1,000 kilometers out to the mouth of the Irrawaddy River, theoretically. So that's been a challenge, just getting him into the wild. But in that area where we were reintroducing river turtles now is a conflict area, and it's very difficult for us to do anything, much less release turtles and monitor them with electronic gear. We would put our staff at great risk if we tried that. But we're breeding them in captivity, and we're having very good success. And so we've got a reservoir now in captivity that hopefully when the situation clarifies and security gets better, we can resume releasing them into the wild. But with the star tortoise, even if we wouldn't have assembled that captive breeding colony early on, we could have gotten those animals out of the pet trade because that's where they were going. They were being collected. People were getting them as pets. We could have procured animals through that route. But with the river turtles, there were none in captivity. So this is one, if WCS and Turtle Survival Alliance would not have intervened when they did, this animal would have been extinct for 25 years. So the fact that we're now breeding them in captivity and we've reintroduced some into the wild, I think is a major achievement.
Definitely. So I have to ask, Steve, how do you celebrate some of these successes in these moments, maybe when you're actually finally to the point of being ready to release animals out in the wild?
I usually just go out and get drunk. No, I'm just joking. It's never as clear cut. People always ask me what's the end state here. And it's kind of like I can't define it, but you'll know it when you see it. It's just a tremendous feeling of gratitude, of elation, knowing when you've worked on this for years and then you see those turtles going back into the river or releasing the tortoises. We knock holes in the fence and they don't immediately all run out. But yeah, it's just a tremendous sense of accomplishment. It's hard to even articulate it, but you feel like you're really doing some good when you reach the point like that. I mean, like today, my colleague sent me the pictures of them releasing crocodiles, putting them into the pen. It's kind of like, I was having just a very boring day, and she sent me this long message and with photographs. That was the high point of my day. I can't even tell you what the other stuff I was doing, but I'll remember 12th of March because they were releasing crocodiles there.
Oh, well, I love that, Steve. It's wonderful to hear about some of these success stories. And I think heartening because there's often just so much bad news in the conservation world. So hearing some of these success stories can help motivate you to keep going when times are tough. And I think another thing that can help you keep going when times are tough is stepping away from your immediate work, maybe escaping through a book for a little while. You mentioned that you were a big fan of all of George Schaller's books. We'll make sure we mention some of those on our website. But do you have any other recommendations for books that you've really enjoyed that you'd like to recommend for our listeners?
I read all the time. It's like what Theodore Roosevelt said, that reading is a disease. And I can certainly identify with that. But I think one of the best books I've ever read, most people probably never heard of it. It's called Grizzly Years. It's by Doug Peacock. And I guess I discovered it when I was in graduate school at Clemson. There was a bookstore in town and I picked it up and read it at that time. Must have been about 1993 or 1994. He made a really good impression on me. It's a great book about grizzly bears, and I've always been interested in bears. I think if I hadn't been a crocodile biologist, I could have very easily have been a bear biologist had the opportunity presented itself. But it's also an interesting personal journey of the author. And I can identify with a lot of the things he says. So it's one of those books that I revisit every few years. I probably read it every 5 to 10 years. I'll pick up a copy and reread it again. I've loaned them out over the years and they disappear and just get another one. And Peacock has written a number of other books, which are really worth reading. But I think this is kind of his masterpiece. So if you're interested in bears or you just want to read a good story, it's certainly a title that's worth reading. Just recently, I'm reading right now a book on the American chestnut. environmental history of that. It's a fascinating. I like to read a lot of history. I like to read natural history, and environmental history is kind of where those two interests intersect. I think I've got the book somewhere around here. It's Donald Edward Davis, The American Chestnut in Environmental History. Chestnuts are ecologically extinct. They were a major component of the eastern forest, and they're gone now. And you read the book and you see the old photographs, it makes you realize what we've lost. Sounds of Life, I read that a couple months ago when I was in Laos. That's a really good one. It's just about acoustic biology, which offhand I don't know much about, but it was a very informative read.
Well, excellent recommendation, Steve. I will make sure we put these on our website for our listeners to find if they're looking for their next book to pick up. And I know we've touched on just some of the amazing places that you've been able to travel throughout our conversation today. And I think these opportunities are absolutely amazing and often unique to science. You get to go to some places that many people across the world just won't have the opportunity to ever go. So can you talk about what are some of the most memorable places that your science and your conservation work has taken you?
Well, Belize, for starters. I really love working in Belize. And there's a lot of people, especially Americans, that were in Belize. And I don't know what they do for a living. But if WCS would have continued to pay my salary to work down there on crocodiles, I'll probably still be there 35 years later. I just absolutely love the place. I'm glad I was able to expand my horizons. But Myanmar, I love Myanmar. My wife is Burmese. My children are Burmese. I'm married into a really big family. And I think everybody that travels a lot has a country that they make an attachment to. That country for me was Myanmar. And when I first went there were very few foreigners. Even most recently when I was in the field there, you go into rural areas that people have never seen a foreigner, and they'll stop on the side of the road if you're walking down the street, and they'll want to have their picture taken with you, even though you can't understand what they're saying. They just want to prove that they actually met a foreigner. Incredibly friendly people. I remember one time this lady and her husband, just ancient looking. I think she was more or less blind. And she heard that there was a foreigner in the village. She came and grabbed me by the hand and took me to their house, which was about the size of a refrigerator box, and sat down and offered me tea and this, what they call lepetto. It's a mixture of pickled tea leaves and beans. She was sitting me down, offering me her hospitality. That's very typical of Burmese people. Everybody addresses me as Dr. Platt. The Sayaji, which just means big teacher. It's just part of their culture. So I really love the country. There's so much there, so much biodiversity, but still very little is known about the turtles and crocodilians in Burma. Our standard reference work was Malcolm Smith's book from 1931. And so it was just a wide open field. So both on a professional basis and on a personal basis, there was a lot there to offer. I left Myanmar in 2020 when the COVID outbreak first started. And I went back. Of course, I was gone for a couple of years. My wife and children got trapped there because they were coming behind me, and then their flights canceled, and it was just kind of a nightmare. I went back in 2023 was the last time I was there, but I can't go back anymore now because of the security situation. I long for the day when I can go back and live in Myanmar. I still work with our team. Almost every day I'm in contact with our staff there. My wife's still there, and she manages the turtle program, but I'm not able to physically be there.
Certainly. Well, it sounds like you've been to some amazing places, and hopefully soon you'll be able to return to Myanmar, see your family again, reconnect with the turtles and all of the amazing people it sounds like you've met there. And I think that's one of the other things that I absolutely love about science and talking to scientists is just the fantastic communities of people that you meet and that scientists get to work with over the years, because I think there are often these stereotypes, Steve. Scientists are portrayed a particular way in the media or in movies and things like that. And I think those stereotypes just don't hold. There are so many amazing, brilliant, funny, creative people that I've met in science. And I love to just showcase this human side of science that people don't often get to see. So do you have some stories you could share with us, whether it's quirky traditions that you've experienced in the field or just funny or fond memories that you've shared with colleagues that maybe go against some of these stereotypes that people may still have about what scientists are like and what life as a scientist is like?
A lot of these stories probably best told in a bar setting, but and none of the scientists I've ever worked with, the field biologists really are cut from a different mold, I think. Pretty much everybody's an individual. I don't want to start naming names because I may offend some people, but I just remember when we worked in Belize, for years I worked by myself, and then I had a real good friend of mine, Thomas Rainwater. Actually, we still collaborate on a lot of different projects. And we had one wacky adventure after another. And I just remember we were real superstitious. We were going out and catching crocodiles every night. Logistically, there's a lot of arrangements that go into this. You have to line up the boat and get fuel and get the boat handler and all this. And so you expect to get a return on your investment to catch crocodiles, and then we would process them. But sometimes you draw a blank. And one night we went out, we had a certain pole that somebody had cut. I can't remember the species of tree, but we ended up scoring really big. We caught like 9 or 10 crocodiles that night. And then after that, it got to be, if we're going to go out, we got to get that pole. And you tend to break these things pretty quickly, a night or two, and you have to replace them. And then, the time before we use this snare, this is the lucky snare. It made no sense at all logically. I mean, that had nothing to do whether we were catching crocodiles, but there was this tradition. We kind of knew that deep down inside, but you didn't want to break the tradition and risk not catching any crocodiles. But we had a lot of fun nights. I had a dog with me. I had her for 18 years. She was a rat terrier, and her name was Trouble, and she was my constant companion. To be honest, that's one of the toughest days of my life when I finally had to put her down when she was 18 years old. But she would find turtles, and so there's this whole body of research on this small terrestrial turtle. These turtles are very common, but they're very cryptic. And it was due to the fact that that dog could find turtles. Nowadays, you see, using dogs in wildlife research is very commonplace. It wasn't commonplace in the late 1990s. And so, were all sorts of adventures we had with the dog. I remember one time going out and catching crocodiles with tourists. The lodge would offer us this boat, and we would go out and take the tourists with us, and we would catch crocodiles. So we didn't have to pay for the gas and all that. But the guy that ran the place was kind of uptight, and we had the dog on board, and we got this really large crocodile snare, and we couldn't get him into the boat. A dog's going ballistic, barking. People are starting to panic. And, a lot of the people on the boat were getting into it. This is like National Geographic type stuff for them. Mm-hmm. But the guy that ran that lodge was on the boat with us that night as well. And all he kept saying, we thought everybody's having a good time. We finally got the crocodile, got it back. And then later on, we saw him. And I remember Thomas was asking, how do you think that went last night? And he goes, it was nothing. It's total chaos. It's like Rambo watching you guys work. And so ever since that night, Thomas developed what he calls the Rambo scale, where, whenever we go out and catch crocodiles, if it was a small one, it's kind of low on the Rambo scale. Or if it was a big 9, 10, 12-foot crocodile, that ranked fairly high on the Rambo scale. So it's kind of an inside joke. And we were always worried the guy was going to throw us out of the place, but that's a whole nother story.
Well, Steve, I love these stories. And I think they do really highlight, like you said, this quirky sense of superstition that I think develops in a lot of different laboratories, not just in field research. You see it with people running PCRs and stuff in the lab as well. And just this sense of humor, I think that is pervasive through science. I think that's something that is another constant through all these different labs that I've worked with. Just, I think the humor, one, helps you get through the tough times, but also just helps you form bonds with these colleagues that you're working so closely with over the years. So I love that. And I think often working together can be critical for solving some of these big problems. You can't solve them alone. And I think you can't solve them without a lot of these things that we often rely on, like funding and staff and technology and all these different tools that we use in the trade as well. So these things can be a limitation, but if we took away the barriers that normally hold you back, Steve, and we gave you all of the resources you could dream up, what is the one research question or the one problem that you would most want to solve?
Fortunately, in a lot of the work we do, you don't need expensive equipment. I mean, we do, there are certain things we need to purchase, like getting genetic work. We've got to have funding for that. Of course, it costs a lot of money to maintain animals, but yeah, a lot of the stuff that we do, all you need is a pair of binoculars and a notebook to write everything down. But yeah, if I could get away and could go back to Myanmar, I would love to investigate parental care in this species of river turtle that we work with. Turtles vocalize. People don't realize it, but turtles do vocalize. And there's a lot of underwater communication going on between turtles. And, there's anecdotal evidence that females come back and wade offshore. The young emerge and go into the water and they find their mothers and she leads them to foraging grounds. Ever since I started reading about that, it just always fascinated me. And if I could go up there on the river and live for months on end, that's something I would just dream of doing. Maybe if I ever have to retire and I can get back into Burma, I would try that. But turtles, there's so much more to them than most people realize.
Definitely. And I think kind of getting a window into that everyday life almost of animals in their wild natural habitat is something that we so rarely get to do.
it's a lot of fun, just what the behaviorists call focal individuals, to find one individual and follow it around and just see what it's up to. You unravel a lot of these basic information we just don't know about them. Even common species in the United States, there's things that still remain to be learned. And I think just finding individuals of any species, if you can, and following them around, it opens up a window on their lives and helps us understand. And it's also important for conservation as well. I mean, it's difficult to conserve species if you don't know a lot of this basic life history information.
Absolutely. Well, Steve, I love this dream project, and I hope that someday, ultimately, perhaps when you retire, you'll be able to do it. And I know we covered a lot of different aspects of your career in our conversation today. I'd love to end by talking about advice. I think this can be really helpful for our listeners who may be struggling with something themselves. So do you have a piece of advice that somebody gave you at some point that really helped you, Steve, that you can share with everybody today?
I don't like to give advice just because I still haven't figured everything out. But when I was writing my dissertation, I got involved in another project, which ended up in a paper that's still widely cited today, but it had nothing to do with my dissertation. And I remember my advisor came in, and he was a very patient individual. Back in those days, you'd print out papers. I didn't even know what a PDF was back in those days. And he came and he had edited my manuscript, and he just sat me down and said, "Steve, you need to focus." And I try to keep that in mind because even now I tend to run off on tangents, but stay focused. And if I had to give somebody advice, it's kind of cliche, but follow your interests. I can't imagine doing something I wasn't interested or I wasn't passionate about. I mean, if I had gone into business, maybe I would have made $1 million. It's doubtful. I don't seem to be very good with balancing my own checkbook, but hypothetically speaking, all of my spare time would be spent doing what I'm doing now. So, I mean, I'll never get rich. Field biologists don't make loads of money. If you're interested in money, it's not the right career for you. But we get to do what we like, and just being out in the field, for me, that means a lot. I don't know if you ever remember that movie Heat with Al Pacino. Mm-hmm. There's one character there. He's an action junkie. And he said, for me, the action is the juice. Well, I always tell people, and I used to tell my students, for me, field work is the juice. Sometimes you have to remind yourself, hey, I'm getting paid to do this. People are actually paying me to go out and mess around in the field with crocodiles and turtles. And so follow your interest. Money's not everything. If you're really interested in doing turtles, doing crocodiles, or whatever type of science you're interested in, that's what you should be doing. Most of your waking hours of your life are spent at work. So do something that you find stimulating and really gets you excited.
Well, Steve, I love that advice. Listeners, definitely follow your interests. Do what you're most passionate about. And Steve, is there any other last piece of advice or perhaps a last note of inspiration that you want to leave everybody with at the end of our conversation today?
I guess I should point out that I'm probably preaching to the converted, but conservation is extremely important. And I think that one of the things we've demonstrated is it's not a losing battle. You hear a lot of bad news, but sometimes the good news gets buried in the bad news. But a lot of these species conservation, we have achievable objectives. We just need support, oftentimes funding. And so conservation organizations, most of them anyway, do really good work. And you can make a difference. So take conservation seriously. And we are in a biodiversity crisis, but we can still stem the tide, keep species from going extinct.
Well, Steve, I think that is a very important message, and I appreciate you sharing that with listeners. Can you tell our listeners, if they want to learn more about you and more about the work that you're doing with WCS, what is the best way for them to learn more or get in touch?
You can check out our website, the Wildlife Conservation Society website. We're based at the Bronx Zoo in New York. That's where our headquarters are. If you're in New York City, definitely visit the zoo. It's one of my favorite places. It's one of the perks that comes with the job is I get to go there on work, but I can also spend as much time as I want walking around the zoo. It's a fascinating place. There's also Turtle Survival Alliance, which we work very closely with different projects in Southeast Asia. They're our partner organization. They have a website. If you're interested in turtles, that's the place to go. And if you want to contact me personally, my email address is just splatt, S-P-L-A-T-T, @WCS.org.
Outstanding. Well, listeners, definitely visit that Bronx Zoo the next time you're in New York City. Steve, thank you for sharing these resources, and thank you for sharing a piece of your own experiences in your life with all of us today.
Oh, thank you, Marie. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to you and your listeners.
Well, it was wonderful to chat with you, listeners. Always great to have you here with us as well. We hope you'll join us again next time for another episode of People Behind the Science.